And who better to talk about the 80s than the singer from the greatest band of the decade, Neil Tennant.
Hello,
Pet Shop Boys. Welcome.
Hello.
Tell our viewers I know all your songs off by heart.
I point out that looking at the film you just shown, that was all, this like two 80s. You showed there Adam Ant and Tony Blair's Boy George and all the rest of it. All that stuff was the first half of the 80s. I think the two halves of the 80s had very different characters. We came up after Live Aid and all the rest of it. It was a very different era at that point.
Let's Make Lots of Money. It's one of the famous songs. And it became a kind of comment on the 1980s as well, the loads of money culture. But when you look back now and you look at, say, the dot-com boom of the late 90s or the conspicuous consumption of London today, does that really make the 80s that different?
Yeah, when you look back at the 80s, it was more amateurish. People were kind of making it up as they went along. Nowadays, everything is very, very professional. If you look at your ghastly, pop-idly X Factor things on the television, they're encouraging people to be super professional. In the 80s, what you had was your punks who came out of the street and out of the gutter and made it up, and they suddenly thought, wouldn't it be great if you became stylish and sort of fashiony? And they created this new thing, which lasted till right towards the end of the 80s. And in politics, I think you had a similar thing. It wasn't people quite making it up as they went along, but it was people challenging the post-war orthodoxy and smashing it, ultimately. Whether that was a good or a bad thing, I don't think we've all quite decided yet.
Yes, exactly. And our perspective is changing as time goes on. Something fundamental happened, though, for good or bad, as Neil Tennant said. It was a British history, modern history, in a way, is before the 80s and after the 80s.
Yeah, I think to a very large extent what Neil said would be true of politics as well. It was largely made up as we went along. Now, the 1979 manifesto did not mention privatisation.
Exactly.
Privatisation didn't get going until 1983. I think British Telecom wasn't privatised until 1984. So that was a kind of second half of the 80s thing. And it was only really because Michael Foot was elected Labour leader, and the Labour Party set off towards the left, that the Conservative Party had the chance to set off towards the right. It wouldn't have had that opportunity otherwise. And all this radicalism that we associate with Mrs. Thatcher, actually quite rightly, wasn't there at the beginning. The stuff at the beginning was extremely cautious.
So the 1980s had as big effect in the long run on the Labour Party as it had on the Conservatives.
Oh, completely. Totally. And I mean, it's interesting, back to Stephen Fry's point about how things come round. Just as there's a sort of consensus that Mrs. Thatcher managed to establish about liberal economics and trade union power and all of those things, and we had to accept them. Interestingly, many of the things that the Blair government has done, whether it's minimum wages, Bank of England independence, investment in public services, David Cameron, at least, maybe not quite his party, have had to come to accept too. But I think you saw Neil's point about the divide in the 80s. There's a different take on this, which is that I think it was a real decade of extremes, because on the one hand you had these sort of liberalisation movements, whether it's the fall of the Berlin Wall, openly gay pop stars, all of that, more open sexuality, liberal economics, all of that sort of stuff. And then the dark side of it, which I suppose in the northeast we sort of got a fair share of, was deindustrialisation, miners' strike for the Labour Party, big defeats. And that legacy lives on. David Cameron is in Manchester today trying to convince people that actually the Tories are good guys.
I wanted to move a little bit from politics. The culture of the 80s, the cultural achievements or lack of, how would you, looking back, was it we know it was a politically significant decade, was it a culturally significant decade, or was it a bit naff culture-wise?
No, I think, I can only talk for pop culture. I think it was the last great era. I think it's now regarded in pop terms as well as the last great era of the pop song, when people felt that pop music could be adventurous, could change, could strive to bring new things into pop music. Pop music now generally, it celebrates. Our song, Less Lots of Money, was an anti-Thatcherite satire, actually. And nowadays...
We got it, actually.
Yes, you realise. Well, congratulations. In America, they didn't. And it was a hit in America. And And nowadays, you know, we have the bling thing, we have what I was saying before, the professionalism, the pop idol thing, where the aim is success.
Yeah.
In the 1980s, we didn't see success as the point. We wanted to create, we wanted to create outrage as well.
Have you changed, as time has gone on, have you changed your view of the 80s?
In the 80s, I was completely against the Thatcher government. I mean, when we had the two miners' strikes, you had these amazing occasions where you would go to a gay club and miners' wives from the northeast would come down and they'd meet all these homosexuals, you know, they'd never seen before, and there was a sort of a coalition formed there.
Yeah.
And it seems to me a tragedy, a lot of things, the deindustrialisation of Britain. I live half my life in County Durham at the moment even. And, but at the same time, you realise that the post-war settlement of Clement Attlee had maybe run its course. And governments, you know, you can't have a solution in the 1980s or in the year 2006 that you had in 1945. So everything has to change all the time.
That is true, but I think that back to this sort of problem, the fact that the legacy of the 80s lives on politically, I think the feeling where you're from and where I'm from, and the problem that Cameron is having to confront today in the Northwest, is not just that these things were perceived to be unjust and unfair, but there was a sense in which the way that they were done was sort of callous and cavalier.
But in a brutal way. And what it did was it destroyed a sense of community. We all grew up with the idea that people were in it together, that we had to help each other. Thatcherism really idealised the idea of the individual, and I think that's been a destructive idea as well as a creative idea. And I think that's something, when we're handing out ASBOs now, we're actually attacking the idea of the aggressive individual.
Right.
And that's the Thatcherite creation.
I'm going to be a bit brutal here, because we're running out of time.
Yeah.
And,
we are. That's a surprise.
they don't want to go home without a quiz.
You, of
course, will have to help them.
I was in the filibuster.
And in this quiz,
it's a good job you're here.
There are two questions, really, and two answers, funnily enough. We want to know the music, and we want to know the answer to the question. And the first question with the music is, who shot JR?
Oh, I never watched that. The music's Aha.
Don't tell them.
Oh, is that what they're meant to be answering?
Well, Neil Tennant's completely... no,
he's a very good shot.
And who was JR, by the way, Michael?
JR was a Texan oil man.
Well done. And who shot him?
I think Miss
Sue Ellen's pregnant sister. Right,
I didn't get that away.
Move on. And try not to help them, Neil.
Okay,
desperate. Let's play the music for the next question. The question is, whose bunny reached boiling point in the 1980s?
Oh, that was Michael Douglas. That was...
well done. It was actually his wife.
His wife, yeah, okay.
And the music?
Damsky.
Well done.
Adamski, that's exactly...
Have we got time for another?
Featuring Seal.
All right, okay, one more. Which politician went for a ride on a star in 1987?
Neil Kinnock.
Nope. Jeffrey Archer. No. He won his libel case against the Star. And the music. They got no chance. True Blue, Madonna.
Of course. Even I didn't recognise that.
Neil Tennant, we're grateful you're here tonight.
Thank you very much.
To raise the intellectual standard of the debate. But that's your lot for tonight, folks, and frankly, it's more than you deserve.